Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. There's been something on my mind over the last little while and I thought I'd share this with you guys. Which is the fact that so many people today are actually living inside an invisible prison. And it's a prison without any doors or windows or walls or anything of that nature. And yet, people are not free. They're not free to express their truest thoughts. They are told that they must not think certain things and that they must think certain things instead. And that because of this, it seems like everyone is literally thought policing everyone else. So there is this sense where we're all burdened, I think. There's the sense where we're all burdened with this notion that we have to conform to particularly strict means of being. And this is being imposed on us externally, right? It's being imposed from outside. These ideologies have crept in. These authoritarian or totalitarian ideologies in many cases. This, what is being dubbed politically correct culture, which is stifling not only free speech, but the ability for human beings to connect with each other as well. Okay? It is cannibalizing us. It is making us into animals. And I don't say that lightly. Because if you take a look at what this actually produces, the effect that these things have, this chilling effect that happens, because no one's allowed to express anything truthful anymore, the truth is absolutely forbidden in this day and age. And so, as was once commented, just telling the truth has become a revolutionary act. But because of this, we have descended into being unable to speak to each other about differing viewpoints, differing ideas. We're unable to have proper, thorough arguments about whatever our ideas might be, good or bad. And we can't incidentally ascertain whether an idea is good or bad until we've actually aired it. See, that's another important component to this. And so, this prison-like system has sprung up around us. And it has crept in because people have allowed it to creep in. You see? And it's not just this PC culture, it's not just this politically correct environment which has been driven by Marxist thinking and postmodernist thinking and so forth, but it's also there in terms of the surveillance state. And people have some very real and valid concerns about privacy. Because we need a certain amount of private space in which to flesh out our ideas before we can bring them into the public arena. We need a certain personal space which should not be open to, for example, governments or to other various institutions. But thanks to these social media giants like Facebook and Twitter, and to a greater or lesser extent even YouTube, everyone's demanding to know our most intimate, innermost thoughts. And what has happened is that people have been very cleverly manipulated into sharing those. And I think that's a very, very dangerous situation, to be honest with you. Because by doing that, you are presenting the paradigm that nothing should be left Nothing should be left in the inner sanctum of the human being. that they should be drained of all thoughts that pass through them. But if those thoughts don't conform to what the system says your thoughts should be, then you are also socially ostracized or branded an unperson or whatever else it is that these authoritarian individuals do. And actually that's the wrong word to use, because they are not individuals, they are functioning as part of a collective. An authoritarian collective. This is another thing I would like to point out. Authoritarian collectives are illogical. The entire basis from which they operate is illogical. Because the collective is made up of individuals who are not allowed to express their individuality. You see, it's a paradoxical sort of relationship that these people have with this collective mentality. And worse still, it's an authoritarian collective. It's mob collectiveness, it's mob rule, essentially. And that's a very dangerous state of affairs. And you're seeing this all across the board, really, aren't you? You're seeing it everywhere. Because these mobs are conducting witch hunts, whether it's on college campuses, whether it's in the political arena. They're just out there literally wishing to burn people at the stake for expressing opinions which diverge and are different from theirs. But their opinions are not their own. Those opinions which they espouse come from a central ideology or doctrine, which has been handed down to them, which is very interesting. So none of their thoughts are original. There's no originality or creativity to be found in these collectives. You see? Now, there are those people that would say to me that surely individualism in and of itself is also dangerous when taken to extremes. And here's what I would say to those persons that would say that. Individualism is also in and of itself an ideology, but it's a reaction to the collective. Okay? And individualism is very, very different from individuality, by the way. The expression of individuality. The expression of individuality can happen inside a collective, provided that that collective is not authoritarian or totalitarian. Okay? So the individuals actually help to further the entire human species, or particular groups within the human species, thereby benefiting that group. But it's the individuals that do that. Whereas under an authoritarian or totalitarian system, what you have is the destruction of individuality, which hurts the collective in the long term, because it's only the individuals that can point out the challenges that are facing the groups, right? Or groups, as they may be. So, in this respect, the salvation of the collective is the individual. It always has been. Which is why you find that the central tenet in the majority of these ancient mythos, if you go and you study those, you find that that is the message that is being put across. It's always an individual that comes along and says, hang on a second, you people of the collective are doing something really wrong here. And here's the solution to this problem, which is going to crop up because of what you're doing. So whether it's the myth of Moses, or whether it's the myth of Horus, or whether it's the myth of Marduk from ancient Babylon, or whether it's the myth of Jesus himself, actually. So this mythos keeps cropping up, and that is the story of the individual bringing something of value, bringing information to the collective, which helps them to alter course and to do things in a way that is more beneficial. You see, that's the thing. So that's why collectives are very dangerous and why individuals are very, very important. But under an authoritarian system, the expression of individuality is curtailed. And so the collective continues down these roads, which are quite dangerous. And you see examples of this, by the way, in history as well, whether it's in the former Soviet Union, whether it's Nazi Germany, whether it's communist China, or Cuba, or any of these other authoritarian collectivist societies. You keep finding that there's nobody there that stands up and is strong enough in their will and their character to actually stand against the regimes many a time. And so the regime continues, the collective continues down this horrific path without any checks and balances to steer it back into the right mode of thinking, really. Now, of course, in the Soviet Union you had Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who spoke up quite strongly against the communist philosophy, as it were, the communist doctrine. And he did that through writing the Gulag Archipelago. And you find that in other various societies, other individuals have stood up and spoken the truth as well, to try and bring the collective back onto a track on which they can better themselves. And so they do not descend into that animalistic, myopic worldview that they hold, which just results in purity spirals and, again, murderous thinking, really. But we're experiencing this yet again in current times as well. We're experiencing this once more because these authoritarian, totalitarian ideologies began to proliferate through the institutions. And so now we have come to a point in society, in this current era, particularly in Western civilization, where, once again, we're finding that people are being imprisoned in invisible cages. Right? That's what's going on. Now, the big question becomes, how do you survive this type of society? That's a really big question for people. How do you survive it? And most people assume, and it's an instinctual response, most people assume you have to go along to get along. And so you should just acquiesce to unreasonable demands. But if you do that, and you keep doing that, then what you find is that you are worn down by the system. Instead of being integrated into it and in some way benefiting from it, you just get worn down and destroyed and broken by said system. And so this is why it's all the more important when you see these things cropping up to speak up and to not only speak up but to do things that rail against these types of collectives, these types of mobs, this mob mentality. You have to counter it. And a lot of people don't have the courage or the will to do that, but that's what you have to do. The answer to collectivism isn't more collectivism. Okay? It's individualism. And individualism is a response, as I say. But let me clarify what I was trying to say about individualism here, because this is very much an off-the-cuff sort of video. But individualism, taken to an extreme, is basically a form of countering the ill effects of a very sick society that has given into this collectivist mentality by sequestering yourself from that society. The problem with taking individualism to an extreme is that human beings are social animals. And we need human contact to keep living. We need human interaction to keep going. And it's very, very hard to take the path of the individual, to actually be willing to be shunned by society. That is not a strength that a lot of people have. They really don't. Because there are dangers with that. It's a dangerous path to be an individual. It can get you killed in some cases. For example, in extremely religious countries, particularly Islamist countries, people are scared of being alienated from the collective because the collective will kill them. Do you see? So, it's one of the hardest paths, I think, to walk, to be an individual. But what is the alternative? If the alternative is not taking that risk, then that usually just results in the whole of that society going completely mad. It's driven to extreme behaviors because that mob mentality just fuels these instinctual behaviors, these animalistic behaviors, and it never ever stops in self-reflection. Okay, people don't reflect on their own actions when they are part of the collective. And we all know this from playground politics, don't we? With peer pressure and all this other business. We've all experienced it in one form or another. So we all know it. But we forget too quickly that it still applies in adult life. We forget all the time. So how do you survive it? That's the question that I was asking. How do you survive? Well, to survive the current sorts of times that we're living in, you actually have to understand two very important dynamics. And these are prison politics and palace politics. Because you can't make it in this life without either of these, without understanding either of these dynamics. And there's a great overlap between them. You see, if you look at any prison population or you look at any royal court, they are microcosms of the larger world. Okay, they're microcosms. And I'll get into how prison politics functions specifically, because as I say, we are living in a state of imprisonment mentally, at the very least, if not in many cases physically. And you'll find that in those sorts of situations, perfectly decent human beings are driven to sociopathy out of an instinct to survive. And these sorts of systems actually make people into sociopaths and psychopaths. Right? Because what happens is, under authoritarian rule, people instinctually develop hierarchies as a means to survive because there's strength in numbers, and so they become collectives, they collectivize. As subgroups, they collectivize as well. And this is partly to do with how, as I say, there's safety in numbers, and because of that evolutionary drive, people do develop in-group preferences, which is where identity politics comes from. Because people start identifying with various groups and various categories as a means to feel safe and secure in uncertain times. But that only drives the problem forward and further. Okay? So the basic problem is that the world around you is built upon these authoritarian beliefs, and it also believes that it can impose its will on your being. Okay? Which is wholly wrong, morally speaking, but then, unfortunately, morality does not enter the minds of people who are part of these collective groups. But in these collective groups, you then get hierarchies, which mirror the hierarchies created by governments and feudal systems, right? So inside these hierarchies, even though they purport oftentimes, particularly with communist doctrine, they purport to be all about equality, actually what happens is, just by human nature, you do get these hierarchies, and you get shot callers, order followers, and expendables. Okay, that's what generally tends to happen. You get these three tiers. Now, the shot callers are the ones that, as the name implies, call the shots in the prison yard. Right? If you take a look at any prison population, you'll see these three groups. And they are the ones that run the syndicates inside prisons. Okay? Below them, you've got the order followers. And the order followers carry out the orders of the shot callers. And they're also prime targets for punishment, should they do anything that is not in keeping with what the shot callers want done. You see? Now, order followers exist inside the prison population as a means of keeping the other prisoners imprisoned. Okay, as a means of keeping the other prisoners in line. Right? But you've also got order followers on the other side of that fence, as in the prison guards. They are also order followers. Okay, and you've got order followers in the police forces, you've got order followers in governments, you've got order followers in the armed forces and in the intelligence services. And what happens is these people just carry out their orders without thinking. Those sorts of people are enormously dangerous because they have no moral compass. They do not sit down and think about their own actions. Okay? And then, of course, you get expendables. And expendables are people that literally are at the bottom rung of the ladder. They've got no skills to survive the prison. They've got no skills to become order followers even, and they certainly don't have the skills to become shot callers. Okay? So the expendables, as the name implies, are expended. They are oftentimes cannon fodder, even in gang warfare, in prison warfare, and you also see this on the other side of the fence again, in terms of the apparatus of the state, whether it's the prison guards or the policing service or whatever else. So there are people who will put their lives on the line, not because they understand what they're doing is correct or not, even though it might be, depending on the action, but people who will do it out of a sense of just standing with the collective. Because they are afraid. That's the big problem out there, is the fear. Because all these things happen These hierarchies form, these collectives form, this self-imposed imprisonment happens out of cowardice. That's what's going on. There's mass cowardice. Okay, and it leads to wrongful actions. It leads to a lot of suffering because these people do not want to act or think as individuals. That's the fundamental problem. Now, where the order followers oftentimes go wrong is that they believe that they have acquired some measure of power. Okay, and they derive this belief out of the fact that they can exert and impose their own, or what they think is their own will, on others. Okay, they can actually commit violence upon others, and they believe this gives them some sense of power or authority. It's all false. It's a power trip, right? But that's what they think. It makes them feel better about their lot in life. There's actually something missing in these people within them. People who have this mindset. Okay? People who have this lust for power. The guards, as it were, or the other order followers, they have this belief that they have some kind of power, but they don't. Right? That's the big secret, by the way, that the real shot callers do not tell them. Right? So the guards who keep the inmates caged run on a power trip, but the shot callers can greenlight their ass on a dime. Okay, they can greenlight them on a dime, which means basically they end up being killed on the say-so of the people at the top of the food chain. Unless you are at the very top of the food chain, okay, you're expendable, right? That's the big secret. The order followers are actually expendable too. They are not exempt. They just think they are. And what happens is the shot callers make them believe that they're not expendable. Okay, because they afford them some measure of acknowledgement. Again, on both sides of that fence, inside the prison and outside of the prison. Okay, you find the same dynamic, these same mechanisms operating in whatever the case might be. But that's actually how the system works. And so your job, because the thing we were talking about is how you survive a system like that, your job is actually to find out who the shot callers are. Okay? You've got to find out who's got the keys to the yard, who's got the keys to the house, because you're in unfamiliar and hostile territory. In this world of ours, that's a given. Perhaps it was always a given, but in the current time, certainly it's a given. Okay? And your second order of business is to avoid getting shanked by the sharks. Let me explain what I mean by that. There are a whole lot of people out there that are sharks. Okay? Your fellow inmates won't hesitate to rat you out. They will not hesitate to eat you for dinner if they see some measure of benefit in it. And this is why you find, again, in another example, in other societies like communist China or communist Russia, the former Soviet Union, or even in National Socialist Germany, what was happening was that the communities and the societies were self-reporting. And so people were self-censoring. Paranoia developed, mass paranoia. Right? And it wasn't without reason, by the way. That's the point I'm trying to put across. It wasn't without reason. There were people in those communities that behaved like sharks. If they smelled blood in the water, they would attack you. They would report you to whatever authorities they thought might help them. Okay, so you have to avoid the sharks. And you also have to know who's holding the keys, i.e. who the real power brokers are. If you don't know that, you're in really, really serious trouble in this world, because you're going to get eaten. Okay? And so, to finish off in what I'm saying here, these people that behave like sharks are everywhere. Okay, they're everywhere, especially in the times that we're living in. And as I say, they won't hesitate to drop the dime on you. They will not. They don't care about you, right? They're only looking to see what benefits they can extract for themselves if they rat you out. Okay, you'll be deemed an unperson, an unmutual, or whatever other terminology they want to use in this dystopian reality. And what they don't know is that the system is designed like this by the shot callers for a reason. The system is designed like this by the people who call the shots for a reason. And that is so that they can identify the useful idiots, the treacherous persons. Because here's the thing, the power brokers obviously know that if you are an untrustworthy person, they can't trust you. If you're willing to rat out the people that you know, they're not going to trust you. It just aids them in being able to eliminate any perceptible threats to their power and dominance. But you're not going to benefit from it. And that's why you see in all of these former systems, under these former systems, like communism, or even present day systems, what you keep seeing is that the people that do this self-reporting, the people that do this ratting out, also are put up against the wall and shot. And this is why they're referred to as useful idiots. Because it takes a very cowardly person. It takes somebody without a scintilla of courage and without morality to do that. You see, that's the thing of it. And the power brokers know that. Do you see? Now, if you want to do more than just survive that society, there is one other thing that you can do. And that is to become a power broker yourself. Okay, and I'm deadly serious about that. If you become a power broker yourself, i.e. replace the current power brokers, then you can survive this system and thrive in it. But the problem with doing that is, here's my question, what makes you think you're going to be better than the current power brokers? What makes you think that you're incorruptible? That's something to keep in mind if you have aspirations of replacing the modern day masters, as it were. If you want to topple the masters so that you can become a master yourself, you have to be sure that you don't have that corruption in your own soul, that you will not give in to the darkness within you. This desire to commit mass atrocities. But the problem is the temptation is always so strong that when you reach that point, people inevitably become corrupted by that power. So keep that in mind. But if you can, in some way, shape, or form, and this was what Machiavelli was trying to explain, by the way, in The Prince. If you haven't read that, you should. Because Machiavelli explores this very question about whether or not it is possible to be loved by the population that you're ruling over. Not that anyone should want to rule over anyone else, because the only real rulership you have is over yourself. The only ownership you can ever have of anything is that which belongs to you. Okay? But sometimes circumstances necessitate certain things. So, ideally, you want to try and retain your moral compass, your morality, your sense of right and wrong, if at all possible. And that's a very hard thing to do, because most people don't understand what morality is. A lot of people don't know what natural law is. So they, oftentimes when they come into power, they abuse that power. There are very, very few leaders who have been either given power by the people or who came to power just by their own force of will that actually managed to maintain their morality. And you can count them on one hand, literally. People like Marcus Aurelius, for example. But that's a very, very hard ideal to aspire towards. Anyway, that's just something I thought I'd throw in there, because there are people out there today who actually believe that they would be better rulers than the current rulers, who are collectivists themselves. And who would end up advocating the very same measures. So, what makes you think that your darkness, your inner dark self, your shadow self, is any better or any more in control or controlled than those people that are currently in power? What makes you think that you are so different from them? But the ideal way to survive is actually to be an individual, to assert your individuality and to challenge the system if it is one which is authoritarian and totalitarian. You have got to do that, even at the risk to your own self. Because if you don't do that, the alternative is living under tyranny. Anyway, I'll leave you with that one thought. But thank you very much for watching. You guys are always pretty awesome. I can't thank you enough for your support. And I wish you all the very best through the rest of your day. Thanks again, and God bless you.